Hey everyone, welcome again to another veteran resource check-in session. My name is Jeff Case. I am the director of the Salt Lake City Vet Center, located in beautiful Salt Lake City, Utah. I am a clinical psychologist. I am also an Army veteran and an Air Force brat. My whole life has been with the military or with veterans, and I'm really happy to talk today. We understand that especially recent events in Afghanistan can trigger a lot of emotions within the veterans. And not only the vets who served in Afghanistan, but the veterans who have served in other parts of the world and even in other eras. Working with the veterans here in the Salt Lake area, we've noticed an uptick in anxiety and depression and anger, a lot of different emotional reactions to things that are kind of going on in the world. And it's been building for quite some time. We noticed a similar trend with the drawdown in Iraq. And it matches what a lot of Vietnam vets experienced many years ago when they left Vietnam and returned home, and then the events that followed after the U.S. withdrawal. So we understand that there are a lot of emotions associated with this, and vet centers are one tool that you can use to help with that process. Today, I'm here to talk a little bit about managing mood and understanding these mood states that we find ourselves in. And I say we because I'm a veteran as well, and these things matter to me, and they matter to those around us. Um, I think the first thing to start off with talking about is recognizing that these mood states are often normal reactions to negative events or difficult stressors that we encounter in our lives, especially ones that feel like very personal. And I think it's important to let ourselves really experience the feelings that we're having rather than trying to avoid them and push them out. We know that they're the role of what we would call experiential avoidance, and that is the act of not wanting to feel what we're feeling. Experiential avoidance leads to all sorts of things, to numb out our feelings, to block emotions, to block thoughts. And what that does is it takes your natural brain's processes that are actually fairly well equipped to chew things over and to make sense and define meaning. And we kind of take that natural ability away from ourselves, especially when we engage in substance abuse behaviors or other addictive behaviors. Lots of things can count. Some people go into video games and can form what look like addictions to video games or online chatting, or kind of disappear from the world around them. What we want to help people do is understand their emotional states and re-engage in their world kind of in a more meaningful way to kind of get through the experience. So there's an old saying that says that the only way to get out of a mood is to go through it. We have to experience it in order to be able to get out of that particular mood state. And I want you to imagine, for example, being stuck in quicksand. And so you're kind of walking through the woods, a marshy area, and you find yourself in quicksand and you start to sink. The natural inclination to do that would be to fight against it and to kick and try to get out. But every effort that you make, every struggle against the quicksand causes you to sink deeper and a little bit faster. What we would have you do instead, the way to kind of survive the event is actually to lay back and float on top of the quicksand. Come really fully in contact with the quicksand, and you'll find that you float across the surface instead of sink down into it. At which point you can start to ease yourself off of that area uh, and not sink, right? So you have to come in contact with the thing that you fear. In this case, it's your emotional experience that triggers anxiety and gives all sorts of negative responses in our mind and our body. When we come in contact with it, when we start to understand it, one thing that we find is that we can make meaning and make sense of that mood. So most mood states we know kind of come from a place that makes sense. Even severe mood states that are triggered from things like post-traumatic stress disorder, major depression, we can kind of dig down a little bit and understand that these moods sort of make sense in a certain way. And and we want to kind of understand what that distress is. So the first thing that I think I'd like to kind of get out there is this idea that we are all flawed, broken people living in a flawed, broken world, bumping up against other flawed, broken people, and that's going to cause a certain amount of distress in our lives. What we would call negative emotions. I would say they're more the difficult emotions to kind of feel, the ones that are distressing a bit, and we have that initial layer of distress. And then we start to pile on top of that secondary and tertiary levels of distress by our reaction to the distress. Like we might start getting a bit anxious and to say, oh no, I can't do this again. I can't have anxiety today. I've got way too much going on. And all of a sudden you find yourself getting anxious about being anxious. And this is the layer that is sort of voluntary. We're going to have anxiety because that's how we're built. We're built to experience anxiety. And I'm glad that we are, because it prevents us from doing maybe some really high risk or stupid kind of things. So we have that anxiety to kind of keep us safe, and it's there for a good reason, right? I remember very clearly in boot camp being taught, stay alert, stay alive. Anxiety keeps us alert. But when it starts to escalate to areas that make it very difficult for us to function, we can start to engage in some good mood regulation strategies, right? And for a lot of times, it can be very simple, just like looking at the thoughts that are associated with the mood. So if the thought is like, oh my gosh, I can't have this, and you start looking at these thoughts, if you can change the way you think about the mood can shift as well, right? There's been a great push lately for the use of mindfulness strategies. And mindfulness is kind of a buzzword, but there's a lot of great data on this, and a lot of research has gone into understanding a mindful perspective. So with a mindful perspective, instead of trying to get out of the mood, this is the fighting the quicksand, you come in contact with it to understand it, become more aware of what's happening with the mood. So you might want to pause and just sort of notice what is happening. So you become kind of the observer of yourself. Think of yourself, instead of being on the football field, you're going to be putting yourself up into the press box, observing the whole field to understand maybe the next play, the next move. So giving yourself a pause. The next part happens when you start to accept the experience for what it is. I'm experiencing anxiety, right? I am not my anxiety, but my anxiety resides within me, and I can experience anxiety and observe what's happening with that without any judgment. And then perhaps taking a posture of curiosity. What is it that I'm feeling, and what can I do right now? And from that curiosity, you're going to start to create some interesting meaning and understanding of your experience, right? And responding then to that with keeping in mind kindness and compassion, both for yourself and for others. This starts by validating that mood. So find the truth behind the mood, the source of it, and then really accepting it for what it is. And this is kind of how we get through it. If you're looking for ways to really kind of practice maybe mindful relaxation or things to kind of understand better the process through it, I would say that anything that you can do to engage in your five senses in a mindful way. So perhaps it could be a visual stimulus. So going for a walk in the woods and just paying attention to things like the trees, the grass, and going very slowly, paying attention to maybe how the breeze or the air feels on your skin, right? Other things that you can do include like finding a focal point, for example, breath. Breath is a very powerful one, because we know that as we slow down the breathing, especially in the exhalation, as we're inhaling and exhaling, if you can slow down your exhale and really focus on the breathing, that becomes your anchor point to really kind of focus on. We understand that that will be a soothing, relaxing, and it triggers in your brain a chemical reaction that brings you back down to a resting state, as your brain understands that I am now feeling safe. I'm in a safe position. Another really important aspect to mood regulation, and this is in particular response to those who get caught up in substance use, I would say that addiction really is fueled by isolation, and there's a great need for connection. I would say that meaningful connection is a really important part of understanding mood and regulating your mood, having people to really kind of reach out to. One of the benefits of coming to perhaps like a vet center is that the vast majority of its employees were all veterans. And if people are missing that connection, and I think veterans experience this, the loss of the brotherhood and sisterhood that we experienced while in the military, coming into a vet center and forming meaningful connections is really important. And it can start with just an individual counselor, but then also moving into perhaps the group therapy. I know that at our center, we offered a couple meetings, some open houses for Afghan vets in particular, and we were able to process the experiences going on in Afghanistan. One thing that was very powerful, in fact, we had a Vietnam vet come to our Afghan support group, and he was able to provide the wisdom of his years and the perspective that he has gained, having gone through something very similar back in the 1970s. And that Vietnam vet was able to offer perspective and compassion, especially to a young Marine who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and was pretty distraught. But we were able to kind of sit with that feeling and really understand it in kind of a connected way. We also know that connection is very important for reducing suicide. And as we consider the risk factors for suicide, that lack of belongingness, that lack of connection really fuels the suicidal thought process. And especially when you start feeling like a burden on others. And a lot of vets in particular feel that they are a burden on others at this stage when they are experiencing difficult mood and or perhaps experiencing addiction. They may perceive themselves as a burden and really need that connection in order to thwart the suicidal thoughts that may come. What I would say kind of in closing is it's okay to feel your feelings. It's okay to really get in touch with that part of your mind and your body, understand how it feels in your body, really connect with that. And as you do so, you'll develop strategies and either through yourself, through the people around you, the resources that are available to veterans, in particular with vet centers, with VAs, or other places that you might go. Some people turn to religious institutions to help them find meaning and come back to a sense of what's happening. But the only way to get out of these emotions are really to kind of go through the process. And especially be aware that if you're having thoughts of suicide, we really want you to come out and contact us immediately. Let us help you through this. We have made strides in treating individuals who are suicidal. We have made strides in treating people with PTSD, with depression and anxiety. We have made strides in helping also those who are kind of overcoming addiction. And I will say that the VA has been the tip of the spear for these things for a lot of years. And we encourage you to come in to get the help that you need. Like I said, we want to kind of get through this experience together, and I think together we can. So again, my name is Jeff, and I'm really glad that you tuned in today.